Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again today here at Reconciliation Canada. We're very fortunate to have with us some amazing teachers and wisdom keepers to help guide us through this moment in time. So today, our session is called Grounding Ourselves in Culture as we move forward from everything that is facing us as a people right now and as a country. My name is Shelley Joseph, and I'm the CEO of Reconciliation Canada. We are joined today by Diane Longboat and Mike DeGagné, along with Chief Joseph and myself. And before we begin everything, I would very much like to ask Shelley Joseph if she would start us off with a song.
Gilakesta Nugwadi Hekwagil Ogwa Atsunacha Hegums. I am Hekwagil Ogwa. My English name is Shelley Joseph. I'm the youngest daughter of Chief Robert Joseph and Donna Joseph. We come from the Kwakwala speaking people. The land we're connected to is on the northern tip of Vancouver Island, the adjacent mainland, and some of the islands in between. I am currently living, working, raising my family in the Tk'emlups village, or the Capilano Reserve among the Squamish Nation, as well. So is the Office of Reconciliation Canada. And we're really honored and humbled to be welcomed and a part of their community every day. We appreciate that traditional way of being that they have extended to us living here. I'm going to share a chant with you to start our gathering. I am a mamaka, or a spiritual healer in my nation, initiated through our cultural ceremonies in the big house. And the picture that you see behind me, that's in Alert Bay or Yalise here in British Columbia. So I'm going to share this chant with you to start our gathering today. Wakest land, Wahalakwe, Wakest land, Kaminwatia, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey. Wakest land, Chan, Wahalakwe, Wakest land, Kaminwatia, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey. Wakest land, Chan, Wahalakwe, Wakest land, Kaminwatia, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey, Wah-wah-hey. Ooh. Alakesta.
Thank you for that. Tk'emlups. I really, I've never seen that shared publicly before, and I know that that's a big gift that you've given to the nation as we try to move through this difficult time in our country for all of our people. So I sincerely appreciate that. Following that, I would ask my father, Chief Joseph, who's also an ambassador for Reconciliation Canada and an honorary witness to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and an Order of Canada recipient, if you would begin to set the tone of this and to offer a prayer before we begin our conversations.
Thank you, Karen. Tila Kastavla. Greetings to all of you, all our relatives. I'm always moved when we get together and when I know that there are special people, unique people in our presence, who share the same values and have the same compassion for all others. And so it's appropriate to begin our Zoom gathering today with a prayer and a ceremony, a chant. The survivors throughout all of the time that we've worked with them, and our guests have worked with them so extensively, have always wanted safe places to tell their stories, to share their experiences, sacred places. And the only way that we can create those spaces, special sacred spaces, is through prayer and ceremony and intention. And so today, when we talk about being grounded in our culture, all people on earth have culture. And if you're not Indigenous to Canada, Turtle Island, you probably coming from somewhere else, you probably or do have your own culture and your own ways. And you can still turn to those ways even if you are fully Canadianized, and turn to those ways to find balance and healing, feeling safe. We're going through some really hard times right now. First of all, we've had COVID for a long time. Then they discovered those precious little children in unmarked graves in Kamloops. Right now we have fires raging through our communities, and there's a lot of suffering and pain going on. People burning churches, people being confused in anger and anguish. And it is in this time that those of us who can are stepping up to try and appeal for calm and reason, understanding of each other, being gentle, honoring those little ones with reverence, remembering their beautiful little lives were taken so unnecessary. And then, of course, the ongoing threats. So we're going to ask the Creator to walk with us and walk with all of those groups I've mentioned, those little children, the people in where the fires are raging, where COVID still is a discomfort. And it's appropriate to open our meeting that way. Creator God, we turn to you this beautiful day, thanking you for the opportunity to continue to do the best that we can in service to each other. We thank you that our guests are here with us who have, over the course of their lifetimes, gathered so much knowledge and experience and are willing to share that. Creator God, we ask you to bless us with wisdom so that we can pass these ideas, don't you, of healing and being better. Maar nou is een ook al wat hem lag wil ik willen ook om te like as was geschaffen het lied gaffen hem dat me gaan nog zo een programma's lana ko kan nog sala wasa la mismatak elf itila geschaffen is kwala gaffen kwala hof dat na kwala flat I maar is dat wacht van wachten on my relations. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for that, Father. I am so honored to be here today with the individuals that have joined us to help guide us and teach us and inspire us to take care of ourselves as we move through this journey, this difficult journey. Part of the grieving, part of the hurt and the anguish, as Chief Joseph mentioned, but also part of it is the rage and the outrage and the injustice of it all. And how do we channel that energy into something that's going to move us to a better place instead of potentially putting us more at risk or inciting a backlash that will not be beneficial to our people overall. I think we're at this critical stage. I mean, everybody's been talking about it across the country. In this time and in this place, for us to really begin to understand who we are as peoples. How are we going to coexist here on this place we call Turtle Island? Kanata or Canada, and how are we going to show up and which values are we going to live according to, because we each have choices in that every day. And just like any kind of athlete or business person, we need to practice the things that allow us to achieve our best selves in a daily way. Whether that's our spiritual practices, whether that's our physical practices, our mental practices, we need to keep in shape in order to be able to respond. And right now, this time is not going to go away soon. There are, as we know, over 150 schools, 150,000 children across this country that were acknowledged as having gone there. We know that there are more that actually attended. And we know that this process is going to take us some time. And so we're really here to talk about how do we create wellness for ourselves? How do we show up in our best way so that we can meet this crisis head on, and that we can actually move forward to a better place and pick up some leadership roles within this, so that we can determine the direction of Canada from here going forward. People like to think about the residential schools as a legacy issue, when in fact they're relatively recent in our history, and the intergenerational effects are alive and well in every community across this nation. Before we get into the next pieces of that, I want to follow the leadership of Candy Palmater, who's graciously been hosting this and who unfortunately has fallen ill over the past couple of days, with a minute of silence for all of the children who never made it home, for the survivors who are no longer with us, and for all of those children that we have yet to bring home. And like her, I will ask that we do a full minute, not a few seconds, but that we reflect deeply on the great sacrifice that they have made for us, because through that sacrifice, they've given us each an opportunity to stand up and become that which we are destined to be. So we will start that minute now. Alakasla. with that, I would like to begin introducing some of the amazing people that we have here. I would easily say we have probably three of some of the most well-known peacemakers and what I would call healers and medicine people in multiple ways from across this nation. Diane Longboat, who is from the Mohawk Nation and the Turtle Clan, has worked across the globe in terms of teaching people wellness and spiritual renewal and its relationship to nation building. And so it's so small, the words for the presence that is her, and for the gifts that she brings to us. Mike DeGagné is one of my personal heroes. He is the president and CEO of Inspire, but he first came to my awareness when he led the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, which I think actually has been one of the most impactful contributions to Indigenous health and wellness practices of any organization in the history of this country. And so I am just so honored to have them here with us, as of course, my father, hereditary chief, Dr. Robert Joseph, who has his own accolades that he brings us here today. And I guess I really want to open it up to Diane to begin our conversation. There's so many questions that we have, but I just want to open that up for you just to begin sharing in your own words sort of where you're at right now, and then we'll sort of go in circle with Mike following, and then Chief Joseph after that. So Diane, if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My Mohawk name is Gahandagwas. It means she's picking sweetgrass, and I'm Turtle Clan from the Ganyangehaga people, the Mohawk people at Six Nations in the Grand River Territory. My father was Cayuga, my mother was Mohawk, and all matrilineal line. And so really to be with you today and to share this time, it feels like family sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share. I want to just say that, you know, as everyone else in the country, those waves have washed over me as well. Those waves of grief and sadness and loss and a wonderment of what these children could represent in the world. And so, you know, I want to share with you that one of the teachings that comes from our people is the importance of life being brought into motion after death. So that when death occurs, life must come after that death. There must be a renewal of the cycle, a revitalization, and a movement forward. And it's so critically important that all of us now take stock individually of who we are, where we stand in the world, the commitment that we have to life, to our mother, the earth, to the unborn that are waiting to come into this world, to the children that we have here with us now, and to the young people who are going to be shaping our country. And so I think about that as those waves washed over me as well. And, you know, the thing that I go back to time and time again is the spiritual discipline of standing in the world as a spiritual warrior of peace. And I wanna just talk a little bit about that, because, you know, when we think about the natural movement of not only the grandmother moon, but what we would say is our elder brother, the sun, getting up with the sun at sunrise is so critically important, because you're starting to move your whole being in concert with the natural being of the earth. And I like to do that right at sunrise to give thanks. And I know that there's many folks from many faith traditions and many Indigenous nations that are listening to us this evening. And I want to just say some warm and loving greetings to each of you and ask you to think about, in your own way of giving thanks at sunrise, to be able to do that, to anchor yourself for the day. I find that in those times of profound loss and grief, that is what stands me in good stead for the day. And of course, you know, all of us, we have our ceremonies, we have our lodges, we have our longhouses, our big houses, we have all of that to lean on. And, you know, I just, if I could say one thing about our way of life, and I say that collectively, culture heals. Culture heals. I don't know how people are moving throughout the world without a real understanding of identity, of place in the world, the gifts they carry, how they're going to contribute to the world. And so, you know, I say to all of our relatives who are listening, you know, take care of self first and foremost, take care of your family, and then build community. Whether you are in the city or you are in our own First Nations, Métis communities, build community. Find those like-minded people who can support you and help you in the journey. And so, you know, embracing, of course, we'll talk a little bit later about all the ceremonies that we have to be able to talk about honoring our beloved ones that have passed on and how we do that. So thank you. Thank you today for giving me a seat at this kitchen table. Yahweh.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing those words. It reminds me of one of our elders here, Audrey Telto Rivers, and her and a friend of hers, Freitas Welland, who is not Indigenous, and they used to every year at the transition, the season change, they'd wake up and they'd go down to the beach together and they'd practice their own traditions together to welcome that. And I just thought that was so amazing. I'd never heard of that before. And how important that is to creating connection and building that community across nations. Right?
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Mike, if you would like to introduce yourself and share a few words with us.
Certainly. So I'm Mike DeGagné, and I began 30 years ago in the NADAP program, the addictions and mental health programs. And went on, as you mentioned, Karen, to work with the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, which was probably 15 of the proudest years of my life in terms of serving our communities. And more recently with Inspire, in many ways the same, just making, putting our energies into something a little bit different, which in this case is education. But I was really interested in your words, Diane, about you know, building community and how important that is, and how in many ways we have to rebuild communities. And the discovery of these children, and I think has caused many Canadians to take a hard look at history and truth, and start to examine what happened in the past. But I think in our own communities, it is it's been another wake-up call for us to start to look at what healing looks like, and getting ourselves in a good place to move forward with all of these sort of political aspirations that we have. And one of the things that I was always impressed with the Healing Foundation was how people formed those communities and built those communities in the early going, really from scratch. I mean, we worked very hard to support about 1,500 different types of communities, whether that was a friendship center downtown somewhere, or it was something in the north in an Inuit hamlet, or on a Métis settlement, or on a First Nation. And so we worked very hard to support all these projects, and we asked them, to think about what they would like to do and what they like to build in terms of community healing. And it was very difficult for a lot of our communities at first, very, very difficult. You would think that they would just say, oh, we know exactly what we can support. We have this already in operation in our community. It's going well. And we have elders, we have our own traditions, and we have our own cultures. And in a lot of cases that wasn't so. We had to ask people to be very intentional. When you enter into a healing process, when you think about yourself, when you think about the wellness that's important for in our own lives and our own families, you have to be intentional. You have to say, I'm not going to wait for this to happen to me. I'm going to do it. I'm going to, and the way to do it is to either take up again or re-examine or discover our own traditional cultural practices. What have we done in the past with intention to address our own health and make ourselves better? And so often we were asked by, at the Healing Foundation, we were asked by communities, you tell us what you want us to do to make ourselves better. You tell us, Healing Foundation, what that looks like. And our answer was, it looks like what your cultural practice has been. It looks like whatever cultural practice and whatever mix of sometimes our own traditional healing and Western ways and, all of those things together, whatever works for you, but it has to have intention. It won't just come and find you sitting on the couch. You have to go out and intentionally find a practice that has meaning for you. And you have to keep yourself well. You really do have to keep yourself well. And I think when we look back on the Healing Foundation, I think one of the great the great successes we had was to watch all of those communities come together with intention and create new processes to help our communities stay well. And we wrote them down, and that was one of the so that we can do it again in the future. We knew this time would come. We know there will be more challenging times in our future. But when we are prepared and we have practices that we know that we can take up again, that we maybe have neglected for a while, but we know that we can go back to them, they'll keep us strong and keep us well and healthy.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You mentioned in there about the idea of going and finding it and building it, whatever works for you. And one of the things that I think is, like you said, most significant about the work that you did with the Aboriginal Healing Foundation is that you wrote it down. Now, those documents, those teachings and all of the lessons that you've learned are still in existence today. So where I know that it is housed in another organization as a legacy project, and I just wanted you to be able to share with people where they can find that.
Well, it's interesting in that, when we look back on all the words that have been created around our own health and wellness. I mean, I think if I only talk about the last 30 years, which for me is not a long time, certainly it's within my work life. We think of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples and all of the volumes of work that have been done to talk about how our healing and our traditions and our wellness and some of the ways in which we use our culture to stay well. And since that time, of course, we've had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we asked thousands of people to tell us their stories of their own personal journeys of wellness. We've had the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry, where all of those people unburdened themselves about tragedy and loss and how they were coping with what had happened. And now we have things like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Our problem is that we are not waiting for more words. The words have been written and the words are there, and a lot of work has been done. And so when I think about the Healing Foundation, I think, yes, we have 35 or so reports on mental health and wellness and other challenges of our communities and how to address them. We have all of this work, but we also have reports from 1,500 community projects, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of stories and testimony and best practices in the ways in which we have used culture to create healing. And you know, in all the years that I've since the Healing Foundation began, and it's now more than 20 years, we have all those documents. And the Legacy of Hope Foundation has the research and reports. I don't recall anyone ever asking me if they could look at them. Or even if it was a student, a doctoral student or something from one of our schools, no one's ever asked to look at them. We keep recreating ways and so much of what's been written down already can be very helpful to us, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's an amazing project in that, maybe sharing that information in smaller, different multimedia ways, right? So that's a beautiful. There's so many amazing lessons. And I really also appreciated the comment that you made about recognizing the melding between Indigenous practices and what I call Western practices of creating health and wellness. And so I think those are really important things. Chief Joseph, I know that that your life sort of just is a practice of this. We mentioned earlier NADAP, and I'm thinking about Maggie Hodgson and all of the what shenanigans I'll call them that the two of you got up to in kind of creating a new way forward in this country. And so I would love to hear your perspective on this.
I think just to start with, the greatest movements in terms of wellness, which is pretty significant and important, were first of all the sobriety movement. When NADAP started, it really opened a lot of people's eyes, and the people who grew out of those programs became role models where we had no role models for something better than the imbalance that was happening in our communities. And so that was a real catalyst, the NADAP movement that Mike referred to. And the second greatest movement was the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. That began to reach others who had not just addictions, but maybe other unwellness traits. And in those two movements, the scale has moved tremendously, and we have some way to go, but we can't ignore the fact that those two sort of, and they were community-based. That was so powerful about them. And they empowered people where they lived to look for ways to seek healing and wellness. And of course, because we're Indigenous, the very first thing that many of us did was look inward into our own community and to some degree dismiss Western medicine, which hadn't really worked well for us. And so it was not a bad idea to look inward and to begin to ask, how did our ancestors find good health and good state of being in their lives? And there always are counterparts to Western medicine. And I think that what we need to do, and when we're talking on this Zoom tonight, there are many who are not Indigenous, who come from other ancient cultures. They should be thinking too about how they can turn to their old ways to supplement some of the contemporary ways that they now apply to seek healing and wellness in their own lives. So those movements were really, really important. I know with survivors who began to meet in circles around the country, everywhere. They weren't sure exactly what they were going to get into, but one of the things that they quickly discovered was that being together is a first step. Reach out, get help, learn from others, hold each other up, support each other by whatever means. And they became brave and bold, and they began to tell their stories like you wouldn't believe, my brother used to always say, you wouldn't believe. And that was another thing that awoke us, hearing all the story from coast to coast to coast of survivors literally awoke all of our families and our communities, because nobody's untouched by the experience of residential schools, not yet anyway. Someday we'll get there when we reach the high heights of good health. One of the things I learned in my personal life, first of all, I had to sober up because I was addicted to alcohol, and it was so damaging. And I sobered up, but I still didn't find that peace that I really wanted. I still didn't find that sense of value and worth that I really wanted. Because if I didn't have those, I couldn't see a purpose that I could design for myself moving forward. And so one day a friend of mine said, we're trying to revive the Kwekwe culture at home, meaning the North Island. Oh, I'm in the North Island, aren't I? Yeah, forget I'm here. And this person said, and you should become really engaged in the potlatch because you can. At first I struggled with that. I'm busy enough. No, I don't think I want to do that. But then I got engaged. I became a speaker. I got totally involved in the culture through the ceremonies and rituals, and practices. And it wasn't until I engaged in culture that I finally began to understand spirituality a little bit. All of the religious instruction I had before, all of the other programs I'd been in before, I couldn't make that stretch and have some appreciation of spirituality until I got engaged in our culture. And then I began to recognize through all of the stories that we have from ancient times, all of the dance and song, all of the chant, all of the ritual were intended to invoke the spiritual element into our lives. And I think that is really important to do. And there are so many ways to do it. The other thing that I found or discovered or awoke to was that in the culture, it was the one place we could go to, and our Genesis stories were repeated over and over and over again. And that and these happened in the territories, in sacred places. And what that brought forth was the idea of family, belonging to these manifest first ancestors. And so there was a sense of belonging to the territory, sense of belonging to the family, and all of this ritual and ceremony that reaffirmed that over and over again and tracked us through the lifetime. Different ceremonies for different ages and gender and everything. And I realized how brilliant our ancestors were. Everything in our culture was meant to keep us moving forward and growing and developing. And it was exactly what the residential schools intended to destroy. Like, absolutely, it was exactly that. And so I guess it falls under that term I'm getting used to, that we need to decolonize and begin to bring back into the present all of the things that were so important in the old days. So culture does save lives, absolutely. Culture does uplift and inspire people. Culture allows people to belong. That was the biggest, one of the biggest concerns in residential school. We didn't belong anywhere. Nobody cared. Nobody loved us. But in this culture that we own, it's all different. And the whole community loves itself when we begin to slowly practice these ancient ways that we used to have. So I'll just leave it at that for a while.
Thank you so much for that. I really, it's so strange when I hear these stories, you know, being a young person at that time when all of this was emerging and knowing the befores and the afters and the legacy that those healing programs left and the impacts that they had first on families, like what you were talking about, Mike and Diane, first on families, first on self. And no matter where you came from, if you turned yourself around, your children would see that and it gave them a higher up, right? And then your children become involved in that. And now we're getting in our family to the stage of the grandchildren picking that up and taking those roles. And you really see, and then you're going to have somebody else come into the healing process at a different time in a different way. And the other piece that I really appreciated about culture, because when we first started learning, first of all, we didn't learn because there was so much shame, and there was so much, there was such a lack of safety if you knew your culture in the mainstream world. It was really dangerous to accidentally show up in that way. And so there was this disconnect, this bifurcation of spirit, I would call it, right? And then taking the time to find out, how do you coexist as one? How do you show up authentically in all the different places that you come to? And I think that's one of the most tremendous conversations that we have in Reconciliation Canada with youth, multicultural youth. When they get into conversations with Indigenous people, Indigenous youth, and they start going, oh yeah, this is supposed to be valued, but in our culture, this is valued. And how do you show up in a way that's authentic in all of those places? And I really appreciate what people are sharing, because it also allows us to evolve. And I think one of the biggest challenges, especially when we're talking about Indigenous culture, because we're trying so hard to hang on to it, is this is the way and the only way, and we never change from there. But we were a very innovative people, and the evolutions of our cultures and our traditions and our practices were really important, because we were also scientists in our observational qualities, right? So having said that, Diane, I would love to get your input, because I know that you work in so many different places with so many different age groups.
You know, one of the things I want to just add to this conversation is that dynamic nature of our cultures across the country. You know, when we think about the wave of NAIDAP, we think about the wave of change that was brought by the Healing Foundation. I was witness to the wave of the realization of our cultures because of the work and investment of the Healing Foundation, and all of its ability to, right at the community level, support the dreams, the hopes, the wishes of our people at the level to rebuild and revitalize our cultures. And so I want to lift up Mike's work, because, you know, I knew one day I'd have a chance to say thank you for everything that you did there. I want to take the conversation into the next phase of where I think we're developing, and that is the restoration of our languages and becoming fluent in our languages, learning to read and write if you want to go that route. But there's something about the power of the medicine in those languages and the movement of languages that gives us that spirituality that Chief Bobby was talking about. It puts us in direct connection with the Creator when you speak your language. And I remember in my own community the chiefs, the clan mothers, and the faith keepers crying to the Creator for fear of losing our languages, losing our culture in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And I believe, and there have been dreams that have come forward to some of our faith keepers, that the Creator answered those prayers of our spiritual leaders. And what we see in the 70s and the 80s is individuals in my age group now, and I'll be 70 in the fall. I'll have 70 falls under my belt. When you think about, what we were able to achieve in our lifetime, to strengthen Medewan lodges, to strengthen the longhouses, to raise up the ceremonies of our people, the sun dances that are moving forward now. Like, there's so much for our young people to embrace now for their own personal healing from the challenges of mental health and addiction, but the challenge of loneliness, the disease of loneliness. And Chief Bobby talked about that. What is the meaning of my life? Where do I belong in my life? Who are the leaders out there that I want to emulate in my life? And so there's so many of our people now that we can turn to, and we can say, look at the tremendous contribution that individual has made. I want to be like that. What was the pathway that they followed? And I would say, when I think back at a milestone in my own life, it was for the Indian Ecumenical Conference in the early 70s in the Nakota Nation, where the elders gathered, and we as young people had that opportunity to sit with elders, talk about our dreams, talk about our visions, and be affirmed in who we were becoming. And that anchor that we needed was the traditional knowledge of the elders. And they brought us into a time and into a place where we could celebrate our past, but we could also look to the future, and we could see ourselves in the future, that there was a for ourselves, there was a place for us. And so, I think where we're heading today, and I'm just going to be really honest with you today, is that what we are really doing today as Indigenous nations, the spiritual leaders of our nations, is that we are reactivating our original nation to nation spiritual relationships with one another. Reactivating that. And the way that we are planning to do that in our area is to answer a vision that was given in 1974 to Haudenosaunee Confederacy leaders to invite Anishinaabeg Nation leaders to come together to bring out our old wampum belts that have memory and ancestors that are watching over them, to reactivate all of those beautiful relationship agreements that we made for peace, for love, for honor, for respect, for caring and sharing. And I believe that once those nation to nation spiritual relationships are reactivated with one another, that it's going to change the face of our relationships right across this country. And I mean from the First Nations perspective. Once the First Nations people unify, and this was told to us by an elder who was our teacher, who went into the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, to fast when he saw his community falling apart. Why? Because they had too much money and they had lost their anchor. They had lost their reason for being. And smashing up a car on the weekend only meant that next week, when you got your annuity payment, you could go out and buy a new car. So what does that mean to work for something in your life? And so the undercutting of the culture comes when there is too much money without understanding relationship to money. So what we are doing, I believe, is reactivating a lot of the teachings that the elders gave us. So lift up that elder was Mushum Kiwade and Don Cardinal from Sucker Creek, Alberta, and member of the Cardinal family. He was the brother to Harold Cardinal. He went into the mountains to fast, and he had only one question about what will bring life to my people. And the answer that he received was, when Indigenous nations unite on Turtle Island, no government will be able to tell them what to do. I believe that 100%. And what I also believe is that wave that the children have created for us is a powerful spiritual wave of unification, not only of our own nations who are doing ceremonies for each other all over Turtle Island, but Canadians, Americans, the world is watching Canada now, and they're watching what Canada is going to do to make not only just reparations to us to achieve justice, but to help us to rebuild the nations of our people based on our own cultural traditions. That's the way forward for us. And I believe that as we raise up lodges, whether those lodges are in urban centers, whether those lodges are in our communities, that those lodges are powerful spiritual places where this knowledge that is so ancient and so powerful and so spiritual, that can heal the land, that can unify people right across cultures, across faith traditions, that this is the fulfillment of prophecy, that at the time of the change in Mother Earth, our people would stand and the world would listen. It's our time now. And we need those sacred places. We need to reactivate our relationship to those sacred places, whether they're falls, whether they're caves, whether they're places of petroglyphs or petroforms. We need to reactivate our relationship to those places, but we also need to build, because our people largely are in urban centers now, and we need to build. Wherever our people are, we need to build. We need to give them the next phase of our development, which is the renewal of their spirit. And I know it's going to happen. I know that all of these organizations that are coming forward in Canada now that say, what can I do? I have had hundreds of emails from organizations and individuals saying, what can I do? And you know, the way to those organizations is become spiritually active and unite with our people for the way forward. Because when our people make decisions, we don't just make it for ourselves, we make it for the good of humanity, those 7 generations that are coming forward. So we are part of a huge movement. And when a movement is prosperous, it will not be stopped. So I would add that to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate. You know, I think one of the biggest things that differentiates us from so many people around the world that have experienced atrocities and genocide is really that absolute desecration of our spiritual faith, our connection to it, and our practices. And really that, as we all know, that was the role of those schools. And I am in 100% agreement with you, you know, and one of the things that we called for actually in the last gathering that we had was the building of these houses, what we would call houses, whether it's a big house or a long house or a round house, within those urban settings, so that our people can reconnect, because we keep thinking about the residential schools as something in the past, when in fact, those systemic challenges continue to persist, with our children being taken away, with our incarceration rates, with all different kinds of things. And I think that this moment in time has caused an opportunity. It caused both a spiritual crisis and a spiritual opportunity. It's everybody has recognized that we need to somehow move through this. And our minds are not enough to take us through it, that our spirits, because of that grief and that sorrow and that desire to absolutely do something, I think that's where it's going to come. And I believe you that, you know, one of the challenges that we have is that economic models that face us in terms of leadership. You'll always, every one of you have spoken today about your responsibility or your purpose in serving somebody, as opposed to I am the boss and it's my way and this is how we're going to do things. It's always about service. It's the opposite in many ways of more traditional leadership practices. And the other piece of it is about wealth. You mentioned money. There's nothing wrong with money. It's how we use it. right? And in Indigenous ways of wealth, wealth is defined by how well you're able to take care of the people. So you have more means you can take care of more, not you get to accumulate more for yourself. And so I think that, you know, there are a great many lessons that we can learn from one another, you know, because we're not the only peoples either that have gone through trauma around the world. And each of us has built our own resiliences, our own lines of ways of addressing that trauma. And my dream around reconciliation has always been that we begin to weave those resiliences together to create something that is better than we've ever been able to achieve on our own, right? And I believe because of the level of loss, and I think finally Canadians are realizing the level of death that we as Indigenous people experience allows us to recognize in ways that very few other people can recognize the power of love, the power of recognizing that I need to be present and be with you today and make those relationships matter, because we never know when we're going to see you again. And that's the kitchen table circles. That's what I call our superpower, right? We're able to do that. And I think that's why we're so good in these dialogue circles. We're so good at creating community, because we understand the importance of connection to one another. And so I know that we were meant to have some time for some questions, but I think that we're fairly close to our line now. And I apologize for that. Once these people get started, I think that they just gave us so much opportunity for, wow, just so much things to think about. And so I just lift my hands up to all of you for being with us. I really want to make sure that that we get time to be, oh, we have half an hour left. Oh, good, so I'm not that bad. All right, I'm confused because of when we usually start. So good, so we do have time for questions, which means I get to hear more from you. So I'm very excited about that. But having said that, I want to invite both of you back in the future as we go through this, because as we know, anything that we do must be grounded in what we're talking about here today. And there's many different ways to do it. So we have a few questions. And I think that some of the, sorry, usually somebody takes care of these questions. I'm not anywhere near as adept at this as Candy is, so please excuse my fumbling. How does the importance of community factor into cultural healing? That's a big one. Anybody want to take a swing? Sort of, it is. I keep thinking about the phrase that we started Reconciliation Canada on, and it's prevalent in every ancient culture around the globe. Namuyut, we are all one. So maybe let's talk about what does that mean. Michael, open the floor to you.
Hey, well, Diane, I really like that, you know, that you brought up the idea of loneliness and this idea that we think we can do it all ourselves, and as if doing something with others and entering into relationships and community and family is somehow less valuable as a way of healing than just doing it all with one person. And I'm reminded, years ago, I read some work by a professor from BC, as a matter of fact, Rod McCormick. And I was reading some work that he had done, and he was looking at Indigenous ways of describing or thinking about mental health. And at the end of the day, when you distill down what it was that he discovered by asking Indigenous people to talk about what good mental health looks like, it had everything to do with being connected to people in your community. And mental health struggles were associated with being isolated from others, being alone, and being away from other sources of connection in your community. And it doesn't have to be that when we get together to talk, to be in a healthy state, that we need to talk to each other only about our mental health or our mental wellness or what we're experiencing. It's enough to talk about, you know, the hockey game. It's also enough to talk about how your family's doing. It's just enough to be in that kind of connectedness. And Chief Bobby, you know, you talked a couple of times about other cultures, and that's really critically important. Here we are at one of the most challenging times in our lives in the Indigenous community, with all of this sort of all these children and all these reminders of residential school as a 100-year scar in our communities. And you know, we need to start to think about how we connect to other cultures. Canadians, in my experience, the vast majority of Canadians are standing on the sidelines saying, how can I help? This is terrible. I wish I knew more about this. For those who do know a lot about it, they're saying, tell me what I can do. And I think we need to say that, you know, if we were all in a talking circle, we were all in a circle, all of us as Indigenous people, sharing our experiences, telling our stories, we need to add more chairs to the circle, and we need to invite other Canadians in. You know, this isn't just to say a sense of finding an ally and bringing them in. It's not about allyship necessarily. It's about using a very simple tool that many of our cultures have found to be really effective over centuries, which is the idea of entering into a circle where we are all equal, where we all share a story, where each person's story has as much value as the other. And through the telling of that story, we can validate our own experiences, others validate our experiences. And there are ancient cultures in Canada, you know, peoples from all over the world that understand this idea very, very well. And we need to invite them in to say, this isn't just our talking circle. And we are not just forging relationships in our own community. We're forging relationships in a larger idea that's Canada. And we're answering the questions, you know, what can you do to help? You know what you can do to help? You can sit next to me and you can listen to my story, but I just as much want to hear yours. And how and that, I think, is true healing. That's that simple circle that seems to work so well for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, the most powerful circles I've been in have been in those multicultural circles with young people who are trying to navigate all of the pressures that are on them about Canadian culture and being one person in one setting and another person in another setting. And actually, they were the ones that requested that we added the value courage to our list of values as an organization, because it took a lot of courage to show up into those circles and share the truths about who we are and the challenges that we're facing and the ways that we managed to navigate through them. It's not about sharing trauma for trauma's sake. It's about sharing trauma for understanding where resilience comes from. So with that, Diane, I would love to hear from you.
You know, listening to this piece is so incredibly important for me. I've seen the chat and I see some of the questions that are there, and they're asking us about our resilience. You know, they're asking us, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we manage to navigate the world? And you know, for me, I'm the elder for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. And I'm also a senior manager there for strategic initiatives. And so every day, you know, we are seeing our patients, we're seeing the needs of our community members in the city. And of course, you know, I've spent the last while at Six Nations. And so seeing the needs of our community. And you know, I have to say that resilience and where we find it from is absolutely in our kinship system. When I think about our families belonging to clans, clans belonging to nations, and those nations seated in our Confederacy Council meetings where our 50 chiefs will gather to talk about nation business for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but also some of the initiatives and the ways that they're moving forward. A lot of our issues globally at the UN and within the nations of our people. Our communities are half in the US and half in Canada. So when I think about what's happened to our people from the very beginning, it certainly has been greed for our land and our resources, but excuse me, it's also been how to break the Indigenous family, so that if you break that Indigenous family, the nation will fall apart. The kinship system will fall apart. When the kinship system falls apart, then the ceremonies and the way that we organize them falls apart. And so it was a methodical way of colonizing that continues today in all of the existing systems, from the way that the government of Canada was formed to the way that the government of Canada has its legislation in place and where it enforces that legislation. And so when you see an entire system that is oppressive against our people, it's one thing to pass a law on language, but it's quite another thing to shift your entire system. And I think if I could say to that next government that's coming in, they need to do an entire shift of their system, because there is no government on the face of the earth that will manifest thriving nations of people until it does right by the people. And until the government of Canada does right by the relationships it created with us through treaties, through covenants and agreements and wampum belts, until that is made right, there's no thriving in this country. There's no addressing climate change. There's no addressing, the treatment of women in our country. There's no addressing justice in our country. So, there's a huge change that needs to be made on their end, as well as a unification on our end. We also, in our house, have to get busy to rebuild our house on our kinship systems, strengthening ourselves, strengthening our families and our kinship systems and our clan systems. And once we have that in order, what happens is that everything else falls into place, because suddenly the clans are forming and the clans are putting through ceremonies that we need to have for the strengthening of our people. So, I don't want the comments that I've made there to reflect on Reconciliation Canada when I talk about the government of Canada. I own those comments. So thank you.
I think thank you so much for sharing that, Diane. As part of Reconciliation Canada, we welcome all different kinds of perspectives. So I think it's really important for the dialogue that we consider those things. One of the things that it reminds me of in terms of our people, when you mention the clan systems, because we have societies, there's all different ways that we organize ourselves. And the beauty of that, which for me was so much of a relief when I finally started emerging into the culture, is that it allows us to show up with our best skill. So not all of us are hoop dancers. Not all of us are singers. Not all of us are drummers. Some of us are really good organizers in the back. Some of us are really good artists. Some of us are really good builders. And it allows us, and some of us are really good hosts. So it allows us to pick up those unique skills and celebrate them, and as a part of a whole. And so I think that's part of where the clan systems come in sense of, I have a purpose, I have a place, and I have a responsibility, a role and a responsibility, and I'm important. And for me, that's what Namwayut means. We never, ever talk about, you never hear our chiefs in our nations say anything about one another without acknowledging Namwayut. And you talk about it, I am nothing without you.
Yes.
So leadership is not about the person in front, but it's about all of us and our contributions to making that happen. So yeah, both of your comments are just resonating so much. I know that there are many, many questions on Facebook, and we're getting lots of interest in this one. So I appreciate both of you. Chief Joseph, if you would like to add some commentary to this, I'd sincerely love to hear it.
When I think about reconciliation, the idea that we're even here talking about it right now is because there has been a wide divide between Indigenous people and all other Canadians. And it has had some really serious implications for Indigenous people and families and children. And we can't reconcile on our own. And so the whole community, which means in this instant, all of Canada, needs to be involved. They are the source from which oppression comes. They're the source from which racism comes and hatred. And unless we can break down those walls that separate us and really think of ourselves as Nazlamayut, we are all one, and begin to try to give definition to our common humanity as Canadians, it'll always be just about negotiations. A few more dollars there, a few more projects there, an economic initiative over here. But how will we ever get Canadians ordinary to look each other in the eye and have the kind of discussions that they need to have to create the kind of understanding that we need to have to transform our relationships? And that should be the underlying impetus for sustaining reconciliation as we work toward all the calls to action, 94 calls to action. I think that as a country, we're missing the point when we're not supporting societal reconciliation. And it goes to the question about how does family and bigger family impact the core group of people who are oppressed and find themselves in great despair. So that was a really important question, and I think a lot of good answers. I think, not that mine were any good, but the others.
Yeah, I think, it's amazing how much people know about the importance of our relationships between one another. And it is by far the most difficult thing to get any kind of funding for. And so the resources that people have been contributing to Reconciliation Canada over the past few weeks has actually allowed us to revitalize all of those kinds of initiatives. So if people are wondering, is there a way that you can help? If you can contribute right now, anything as small as $5 up to whatever is comfortable for you, please feel free to donate to reconciliationcanada.ca. And it'll allow us to continue to do this important work and really try to begin to create that movement across this country that connects us together and that allows us to learn from one another and share our stories. I know that there are so many more questions online. As I said, we will ask everybody to come back again But I think it's time for us to close. I want to also acknowledge the team that's in the background that's making all of this happen, and for all of the answers that they're providing on our Facebook and some of our feeds. I really appreciate it. There's so much more that we can talk about, which is why we spread this out to 16 sessions rather than trying to answer every question about indigeneity in an hour and a half. There's so much that needs to be learned, and likely, given the kind of responses that we're receiving, we'll continue with this, because I do think that these are things that need to be heard over and over again in different ways, just like in the circle, so that it really begins to connect to you. The best way that I heard about healing explained to me is that, yes, sorry. The best way that I've heard about healing explained to me is that you stand in the closer you are to the middle of the circle, the less likely you're going to fall off the edge. And so that to me is the importance of being in circle, of being within that. And everybody's circle is different, so there's overlapping. But I think that that's a really important piece. We understand that we're connected in there, and that there are people there to support us, who love us and care for us. So with that, I would invite Shelley to share with us a closing song. And then if I could ask Diane, I know that we haven't spoken about this yet, but if you could share some final prayer or words with us at the end, I would be sincerely appreciative. Shelley?
Thank you, Karen. And if I can have my camera turned on, please. Here I am. I am sitting with my firstborn. She is Tk'emlups. That's her traditional name, handed to her from my father in his potlatch in 1990, when she was 8 months old. I raised my children embedded in culture their whole lives, because I felt the benefit myself of when I was in our ceremonies back home. My father would bring me, and he sat me with our aunties, his aunties. And even though I was doing nothing, I was sitting and watching. That was my most favorite place to be in the world, little 4-year-old girl. And in that space was the only time I felt like I belonged and that I mattered, even though I wasn't participating. I wasn't singing at the time. I wasn't dancing. I wasn't being of service, helping. But wow, that was a powerful time in my life. And as an adult, I know now that it was because of this concept, the manifestation of Namwayut. We are all one. Our culture, everything about it said, you matter. Everything about it said, you belong. And so when the spirit of Namwayut is being manifested through song, dance, language, the building, the dirt on the floor, the fire, and everybody there, you can feel it just sitting there. And it's so powerful. And that's what our culture did for me. And so in raising my own 3 children, I made sure we were there as much as we could. When we're at home, I'm teaching them about songs, dances. My firstborn, she weaves, she's a carver, she's a singer. She knows more language than I do. I'm so proud to say that she has taken this to another level, beyond me even. I'm so proud of that. And it fills me with so much hope. And so I was so honored to even come and play a little part in today's discussion about culture, about grounding ourselves in culture. I've done that my whole life. That's what got me through the turmoils of before my parents were healed and the dysfunction we used to live in. That's what got me through. All the racism, that's what got me through. All of the hardships. And I knew that I needed to give this to my children to help them get through. And so now we're in this surging of culture and wellness, and I know the benefits of being grounded in culture, the healing that it brings. And I'm blessed now to have education behind me as well, and I'm able to be a bridge of Western modalities and traditional practices and how that's going to help our people. And so this song that we're going to sing is called the Gilskamlish. When we're in ceremony in our potlatches back home, in the very beginning, our sacred curtain drops to reveal all the treasures of the spirit world that are here with us, that speak to that belonging. Everybody belongs. And how we're connected to one another, to the land, to spirit, to the ancestors, everything. We're all connected, and that's what this song speaks to. And I've asked my firstborn to come because even though I am a singer and I'm a good singer, she's outdone me in so many ways, and I'm just so proud of her, and I wanted to come and share this intergenerational legacy of culture and what it can do for us.
Before you start, I wanted to interject that make no mistake, sister. Although you felt you were doing nothing when you were sitting with your aunties, you are medicine, and you're bringing love, and you're inspiring us to remember why we're here. And it's one of the reasons why this little fellow is allowed to run and do what he needs to do, because that's what our children need to know, that they're important. And it's what my father allowed me to do at his knee when he was working in those really important offices back in the day. And I think it's something that I hope we're able to revitalize even more. So thank you.
Hi.
you so much, daughter. I do want to end by saying love, 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 love is always the answer. Yeah, for sure. I definitely felt loved in all the cultural spaces I've been in. It's definitely a common denominator across Turtle Island. Gela Kessa.
Gila Casa.
Thank you
You
so
can't start
such a
started our video, so
Such a beautiful song. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I have the honor of offering some of our closing words. Yawas Sangwe Disum. Thank you, Creator. Gahandagwas Yunyats. My name is Gahandagwas. And this night, I raise up all of my beloved relatives who are with us here and those who will watch later on. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share the very best of our experience, the very best of our culture and our ways of being in the world. We give thanks this day that you gave us life as Ongwehongwe people, as red nations of people, that you gave us the stewardship and guardianship of these homelands to share amongst each other and to respect and honor the boundaries and the beautiful cultures and ways and traditions of the millions of Ongwehongwe people who live on Turtle Island. This day, we say that a great calamity has come to our people, and it was foretold in prophecy that there would be 500 years of a very deep sleep and where we would almost forget who we are. But today, Sangwe Disang, we have come through those very difficult times. And as we have moved through those times, it is the original way of life, our original teachings, our creation story, our songs, our ceremonies, our kinship systems, our homelands that have kept us strong. This day, we find ourselves at a precipice. But we don't stand at that precipice alone. We stand there with many millions of people, cultures and faith traditions throughout the world who are standing with us. And as we now bring the very best of our nation's traditions and cultures and ways of being in the world forward to share with people of the world, we want to give thanks that no matter what has happened, that the young people have been nourished by the Spirit, that the young people stand strong in the world today, that the young people with all of their gifts are spiritually activated. They are the new leaders, the new visionaries, the new prophets. They are the new leaders who will make a difference in the world to build new economies, new legal systems, new governance systems, new health systems, new social service systems, new education systems that will be, as the elders have said this evening, in a circle, so that every single human being brings their gifts to the circle and finds their seat in that great circle of life. So this day, Sangwe Disang, our Creator, we give thanks that we have had this very precious time together, that we have shared some things that we hope will inspire, that will heal you, that will help you to feel the greatest gift that we have as original peoples here on Turtle Island, and that is that gift of love, the gift of infinite love that comes from our Creator. We give thanks this day that Reconciliation Canada exists as a powerful force within our country to unify our people, to unify Canadians so that we can stand shoulder to shoulder for the change that we need to see, that change based on one law of love. And so with these words, Creator, we ask you for the ancestors to continue to dream with us, to guide us, to vision with us, to inspire us, for the healing and the protection of the nations of our people and the nations that now call Turtle Island our home. We ask you to inspire the young people to carry their medicine in the world with absolute surety of the spiritual power that is so incredibly important for them to carry that spiritual power into whatever work that they do in the world, so that wherever they walk in the world, they can show up as their true, authentic Ongwe selves. We thank you, Creator, for giving us this path and for giving us this lifetime in which we can make a contribution, all of us all together, standing shoulder to shoulder. Nyawa, Sambwe di Sambwe se, Ganalunkwa, we love you very much. And Ganalunkwa, my dear relatives, Ganalunkwa se wagwego. I love you all. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you.